A gun in the face.
Then all of a sudden, they all kind of lined up. They pointed their guns at me. And this is the point where I thought, I'm going to die today.
Started 2 years of horror for an American in Venezuela.
They said, you need to give us your phone and get ready because you're coming with us.
I'm Becky Bruce, and I spent a year researching and piecing together Josh and Tammy Holt's story about their ordeal in a notorious prison.
That's when everything started to turn bad. We had another pound on the door. Boom, boom, boom. And there was the police once again.
You can binge all of the episodes of Hope in Darkness on kslpodcasts.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
In today's episode of Project Recovery,
the worst thing that could have happened for me was I got off of parole because I had no leash. I had there was nothing holding me back.
No accountability
from my ultimate escape. That ultimately the addict, the chaos between my ears, wanted to kill me. And I eventually went back to a needle. I eventually went back to methamphetamines, and I lived a really slimy life for the next couple of years.
Make sure you listen to the end. Find us on Facebook at Project Recovery. We'll have that and much more coming up. Hey, welcome to Project Recovery, a podcast about addiction, but more importantly, it's about recovery. And it's brought to you by our friends at knowyourscript.org. They help you know your script when talking to yourself, when talking to your doctor, when talking to loved ones. Because as we've seen so many times on this podcast alone, Dr. Matt, is that people have got into their addiction through a legitimate problem, and that started with opioids.
Oh, definitely. I think communicating about our prescriptions is becoming the standard. In fact, they've increased the requirements for physicians just in this last month to if their patients are taking benzodiazepines or opioids, where they have to communicate with all the doctors that are prescribing. They have to before they prescribe, or they can get in trouble with their prescription license. And so I think that's pretty cool. It's not just for us, it's for them. Everybody needs to be talking about it, asking questions. Don't be shy. That's the biggest thing. Just don't be shy.
So normally in this first segment, we talk a little bit about my recovery and what's going on. And I had something sort of planned for you, but you said something, and then my mind went, hey, let's see what this goes. Okay?
Oh, great.
Do you think opioids are a legitimate villain?
No.
Because I think a lot of people and understandably hate opioids because of the damage that they have caused.
Right.
But is it a legitimate villain?
Well, I think it's a tool. And when used properly in the right context with the right supervision, it's a useful tool. And a lot of people have benefited, necessarily so, from their use of opioids. However, I definitely empathize with anybody out there who's had their life turned upside down or a loved one's life turned upside down by opioids. I understand that. But it is a tool, and I think in the past there just hasn't been enough oversight in how that tool is used. And I do think it could be used a lot less. We are developing alternatives, including things like meditation for pain management and things like that. So I see it as a tool that has been mismanaged.
The reason I ask that is because, when we post stuff on social and we do episodes that have to deal with opioid abuse, a lot of times people paint it as the villain. Mm-hmm. And then we'll put stuff on Facebook and someone will say that the opioids ruined my life. And then to juxtapose that, I'll have some guy on who will say, hey, if it wasn't for opioids, I wouldn't be here today. I couldn't move. Mm-hmm. I couldn't do this. And so, when you go out there and you vilify opioids, understand that there is a place in the medical world for opioids.
Right.
And so I think what you said it, and you said it best, is that there is other alternatives. But if used correctly, it really is beneficial to those who need.
Yeah, I think it definitely can be. And that goes back to stressing our sponsor's message, which is know your script. You have to speak up. You have to talk about it. You have to educate yourself. We live in the world of Google. And so
Dr. Google knows everything.
Nobody has the excuse of saying, I don't know anything anymore. Like, at least start with looking stuff up yourself and then starting to ask questions.
Maybe do a little fact checking. Listen to this. My mom, and I love her. She's the strongest woman I know, and she is amazing.
She is.
But there isn't a week goes by that she doesn't send me something that's on YouTube or something's Googled that is going to solve the world's problems.
And you're like,
And I'm going, Mom, it's only got 9 views. I don't think you and 8 other people are on the inside track on this.
Right,
you know,
exactly.
so maybe we should probably, and I'm not saying that there's not people who have an inside track on stuff and that there's not good information to be had on the internet, but you should probably check your sources.
Yeah, know your sources.
And
sure.
do a little research yourself. But so many times in today's society, we just take what is given in front of us and run with it. And I think that's kind of what happened with the opioid epidemic in the beginning, is the doctors were prescribing them. We didn't know that much about them.
We just said, okay.
Yeah, the doctor prescribed it. And so it can't be bad. And so I think that led a little to what's going on.
Oh, it for sure did. And I think physicians maybe didn't understand the addiction potential necessarily in the beginning, and or assumed we would, as consumers, manage ourselves appropriately. And so what we realize now is it takes sort of a community of people working together to utilize these medications properly. Benzodiazepines are another one in the psychiatric world that are prescribed for anxiety, and they are quite effective, but can have a high addiction potential. So we need to know our script. We need to know that we are ultimately the consumer of our own health care, and so the responsibility starts and stops with us, I think.
All right, now we hashed that out, so we've got a little time left. And so I'm going to remember those stories when you were a kid where you can pick your own ending?
Oh, yeah. Choose your own adventure.
Yeah,
yes.
So I'm going to let you choose the adventure.
Oh, great.
We can either talk about the Wild Wild West, which is Vegas, which I just got back from this weekend, or me always feeling like there's going to be another shoe dropping.
Vegas, baby.
Okay, so here's the deal. So I went down to Vegas with my girlfriend and a bunch of friends. It's kind of like this 6-couple group that we travel with.
Okay.
They're the same couple that I went to San Diego with right out of rehab.
Right. Oh, right. Yep.
And the ones that I went on the cruise before the pandemic started.
And just for the listeners, we got some fun pictures from you down in Vegas.
Yeah.
Big party going on. Lots of fun. Everywhere Casey goes, it's always fun.
It was crazy. So we're at this big pool. It's called the Circa Pool. And
how big was that screen?
100 feet screen.
Oh, my goodness.
And just sat out there. And I'll tell you what.
It looked like it was a happening
Sober
place.
people watching is the best time ever. It really is. Because you see people. And I'll tell you what. I've got daughters. And I came back and I called my ex-wife and I go, hey, our daughters don't have any of those swimsuits where their butt cheeks hang out, because that's all you saw down in Vegas. And it didn't matter if you had a butt that should be seeing the light of day. It was out there.
For some reason, people don't manage that one very well either.
Yeah, I was like, wow, this yes. Well, there it is.
Yeah, it is.
And so, but I wanted to talk about, because Vegas has now legalized marijuana.
Right. Mm-hmm. Well, the whole state, right? Nevada.
Yeah, Nevada. Yeah. And so this was my first time down there. And to let you guys know, it doesn't end with me doing marijuana. I'm still sober 100%. But we were walking along Fremont Street. And for those of you who don't know, Fremont Street is kind of like old Vegas.
Right.
They've got a zip line that goes down the middle. They've got street theyperformers, restaurants. And
They're just trying to capture the old Vegas feel.
Yeah,
right?
and so it's really cool. And great people watching there, too. But it was like walking through a Grateful Dead concert.
Really?
I mean, there was so much weed on the streets being smoked out in public, which I don't think is legal, but...
I don't know the rules on that. I think you're right, though. I think you're supposed to...
Yeah, do it in the confinement of your own home. Uh-huh. And then the hotels don't want you smoking weed in their rooms.
Right.
And so, I mean, nobody really thought this through.
Well... I think they did. It was the dollar signs that won the conversation.
Yeah, probably. But I was amazed of how much was actually going on.
Wow.
And, to see, families walking through with their kids and just people smoking joints and blunts and all this. And I was like, huh.
Yeah.
But once again, I held strong, and I don't even have that desire.
Let me ask you this, though, because every once in a while I'll get a question from somebody who listens to our show, and they'll say, Casey sounds so optimistic. Doesn't he ever struggle with, like, the temptation? And here, this is a great question, because I think with alcohol, you've really put that in its place, and not that it's not something to always manage and keep your eye on, but I don't think that's been a big temptation for you. But here's a different substance that could get you, intoxicated and feeling different, and it's not your DOC. So is that sort of tempting? I mean, you could go down to Vegas and nobody's going to notice who you are, and if everybody's doing it, like, is that a temptation to kind of get a little
I've never
loose?
been tempted by marijuana since I've been sober. Not once. Never once.
Not even in that setting.
Not even in that setting, because to me it adds nothing of value to my life.
That's a good way to look at it.
Nothing of value, nothing good would come from me doing that. And all I would see is the heartache that it would cause. I couldn't do this podcast in good conscience without telling you if I had done it, because I would feel like a fraud and a failure. And I'm not saying that I don't think weed is better than alcohol or vice versa or whatever it is. That's not mine to decide. But I know in my life, in my recovery, it makes no sense for me to do that.
Well, that's maybe a great way to just live your life and make decisions. How, a decision you're going to make, in what way does this add to, or take away from the quality of my life?
And I've said it on the podcast before, but we've got a lot of new listeners. There's been 2 times that I thought a beer would be good. And it was right out of recovery. It was on the first trip with that same group down in San Diego. One, I was sitting on the beach with my girlfriend. The sun was setting. The waves were crashing up on the beach, going back and forth. And I thought to myself, this is what beer is designed for.
Yeah.
This is when I should have a beer.
Right.
But I was quick to remember what I learned in recovery. And they say play the tape forward 24 hours. And I know for myself that if I were to have that beer, it wouldn't stop at 1.
Never has before.
Nope. And then 2 nights later, so I didn't have a beer. And it was a brief thought, but I already had that big conversation in my head. 2 nights later, we go to a Padres game. This is baseball.
Yeah.
We're up there watching down. The sun's setting again. It's beautiful weather out there. And up comes this guy. Peanuts. Ice cold beer. Peanuts. And, all of a sudden, people are passing peanuts and beer across me, and I'm thinking...
under your nose,
I'm getting tested. I'm like, but this is what beer also was designed for. Baseball. There's nothing more American than peanuts, baseball, and beer.
They go together.
Right?
Yeah.
That was their game plan. Like, they were sitting around and we go, we got peanuts, we got a baseball, and we got beer.
Oh, yeah, they know what they're doing.
Yeah, this is the perfect storm.
Right.
And so those are the only 2 times
really
in my recovery
that it felt really tempting.
That I thought, but I won't do it because I know where it will lead. Because I already know that if I was going to be drinking at a baseball game, I'd have 3 beers before we got there. I'd have 2 before they came to me and offered me it. And then I would have 3 afterwards. And then I would try to talk the whole party into keeping the party going. And you know what sounds good? Let's go do some karaoke. You know what I mean? And I would try to talk everybody into going and doing that. So I'm very good at playing the tape forward and knowing where it ends.
I think that's an excellent skill. I hope people are listening, kind of picking up on that. Number 1, asking yourself, does this add to the quality of my life, whatever I'm about to do? Number 2, play that tape 24 hours in advance. That's a great way, delayed gratification. What do I want more? How do I see things in the next 24 hours? I think those are great skills.
And to be honest, I am so grateful and thankful for the life that I have right now. And I could tell you, September 3rd, 2018, laying on my back, blood running down my face, looking up at the sirens, I could have never imagined this.
Yeah.
I never imagined that if I fought and gave it everything I got, I could be here today. And today I am. And so I am so grateful for that. I'm grateful for this podcast. I'm grateful for you. I'm grateful for our guests and everything that I'm being blessed with. And it truly is a blessing. And so I'm just grateful. And so it's not worth it for me to risk it.
Yeah. Well, I think it goes back to what we've learned, you and I, from some of our wonderful guests, and that is that you have to put your recovery above everything else in your life in order to keep everything in your life, right? And so if you put a recovery above everything, then everything else remains yours. But once you don't, once you start to, manage that in a different way, you can lose it all.
It's like that thing we talked about 2 weeks ago. I gave up one thing for everything. Now I give up one thing and I get everything. Did I say that right?
It sounded pretty good.
Okay, because sometimes my head gets in front of my mouth and it doesn't make sense.
Well, the Casey-isms when they flow.
I saw somebody say that on Facebook, man. This episode was full of Casey-isms. I'm glad you guys are speaking my language.
We are. We've adapted to you.
There we go. And we've got a great guest today. I've known him since I've been in the recovery world. He's helped out so many. His name is Micah Niles. He works for Steps Recovery. We're going to find out about his story coming up next. You're listening to Project Recovery.
A stranger with a gun came upon two teens taking pictures under a rising full moon. But violence is only the beginning of this story.
Sometimes I thought, there are no miracles. Yeah, there are, and this is a big one.
I'm Amy Donaldson, and I've spent my career talking about how lives are undone by violence. The Letter is a podcast about how lives are remade. Follow The Letter at theletterpodcast.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
Hey, welcome back to Project Recovery. I'm Casey Scott. That is Dr. Matt Woolley. He's got his head buried in his phone because he's a clinical psychologist. You're probably doing some research, right?
No, I was trying to respond to my kid as fast as I could before you started, but you just jumped right in.
Is there something crucial? Maybe I can help? Because, you do so much giving on this show back to the community. Maybe I can give you some help.
I'll throw it your way.
Yeah.
My nephew is in a play this weekend, Shrek.
Yeah.
And my sister-in-law has some extra tickets, and I'm trying to make sure my kids know that they can go see Cousin Noah in his play.
So here's what you do. You send her a text and go, hey, I don't care what you're doing this weekend, but between 6 and 8, we're going to see Cousin Noah at Shrek. Because why? Family time first.
Okay, there you go. That's
you know what I mean?
That's what I'll say.
There you go. He's not going to say that. Hey, so our guest today is Micah Niles. Now, I ran into you right out of recovery because we are both kind of doing the similar jobs for different recovery centers. And we're going to find out more about that in just a second. But Dr. Matt always likes to find out a little bit about who Micah is and where Micah grew up. So where does the story begin?
Yeah. First of all, thank you for having me. I'm absolutely honored to be here. The conversation you guys are having and, spreading the word that you guys are spreading is absolutely amazing. So
thanks.
I'm honored and I appreciate you guys inviting me. My story really starts when I was a young boy. I was 8 when things kind of shifted for me. I grew up here in Utah. I grew up with my mom. I had 2 sisters and things were just fine until 3rd grade. We for the first time moved from a stable environment, same school, same friends.
Everything that you knew.
Everything I knew. I was a Ninja Turtle, and everything was good, right? My mom working multiple jobs trying to support a family. We ended up moving to another city. And for the first time in my life, in my short life, I experienced not being accepted, right? And just not fitting in, not knowing where I belong, not knowing how to act, how to interact with myself as well as with the world. I got bullied. I got chased home from school. And I think part of that was I got along really well with the girls. I had 2 sisters, and I got along really well with the girls, and I just could not figure out how to make friends with the guys, and that's all I wanted.
Now, Dr. Matt, you're going to probably chime in here and say, for 3rd grade, I mean, that's a pretty crucial time in our young lives, right? And to feel those kind of feelings.
Yeah, you're a pre-adolescent and you're really starting down that path of accepting. You said you didn't feel accepted, and that's sort of the name of the game. Striving for competency is a phrase I use a lot. You're trying to find your place, what you're good at, and so making friends is a big part of that. And kids survive moves, but that's kind of a tough age to do it, and a lot of kids struggle reestablishing that. So, yeah, I can see how that was a seminal experience for you.
I mean, I've got a kid that's in 3rd grade right now, and, I remember being in 3rd grade. And social is your currency, kind of where you stand,
And you want to find it's the beginning of really trying to identify who you are and what you're good at. So am I an athlete? Am I an artist? Am I a musician? Am I cool or am I not cool? And so often you, unfortunately, because you're just a kid, you let your social group determine that for you. Like they tell you if you're cool and they tell you if they pick you for the team. And when you don't get picked and when you don't get told you're cool, man, that's tough.
I talked to my kid. I go, hey, what'd you do at recess today? He goes, well, I just kind of hung by myself. I go, why? He goes, well, because Levi, he's a sporty dad. And I go, he's a what? he's a sporty, and that's what he calls the kids that play the sports, you know. And he goes, sometimes Levi will hang with me and we'll play some games, but then other times he wants to go do the sports. And so I just kind of chill by myself, Dad. And I go, okay. I go, why don't you try that? And he goes, I have. It's not my deal, Dad. And I was like, okay, cool. So you say in third grade you were more friendly with the girls because you probably associated with them better? Yeah.
I mean, it was just easier conversations for me. You know, and you know, piggybacking off what you said, Doc, I experienced being a chameleon for the next couple of years. You know, just trying to really just fit in. You know, after a series of moves, and unfortunately that wasn't the only move. From third grade to fifth grade, we moved. In fifth grade, I went to 3 different schools in the same year. So it was just a series of moves.
Was this sort of an economic issue? Mom trying to provide?
Yeah, Mom was doing her best. It was just
and so many families are caught in that, right?
Yeah. Sure. Yeah, I mean, single mom, 3 kids. You know, me and my sisters, in a lot of ways, we raised ourselves because Mom was working late. And, you know, we did our best. She did her best.
May I ask where your dad was?
My dad was an alcoholic on the streets somewhere. He passed away many years later. I never met my real father.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. I mean, me too. Is what it is.
So you moved a bunch until about 5th grade, and as you said by your own words, you were kind of a chameleon, trying to figure out who you fit in with and what was kind of your scene.
I most definitely was, and in 5th grade, we moved back here to Salt Lake, and we moved to Rose Park, and I right across the street, and this was a pivotal point in my story. Right across the street, there were some guys that were older. They were all teenagers, 15, 16, and they would always play football in the street. And I was a sporty, right? Like that's what I did. And I remember standing on my front porch while they were playing football, throwing my little Nerf ball in the air, just praying that they would invite me to come play. And they did. And I remember feeling accepted and feeling a part of for the first time in a long time. And fortunately for me, I found some acceptance, but unfortunately they were just the wrong kind of kids.
But you were 5th grade?
I was in 5th grade.
So you were like 10 or 11, 10? And so they're 15.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a tough mix, right?
They were my sister's age. So both my sisters are older, and they were all in either, you know, they were all in high school. They were all going to West High, and I was in elementary school, and you know, it was, the dynamic looking back was weird, but I was like their little brother. I eventually just evolved into, you know, their little crony. But I didn't care because I had finally found some friends. And they were all, you know, doing drugs, drinking, stealing, you know, some were gang members. You know, I mean, it was, you know, they were the wrong crowd. But that didn't matter to me. It just absolutely didn't matter because I'd finally just arrived. And then I eventually started to entertain the thoughts of what they were doing, which was smoking pot and drinking. And at the age of 10 was the first time that I smoked weed. And I'll never forget the feeling that I got. Everything just kind of washed away. Like, I remember that day very well. And everything just washed away. All my worries, all my problems just went away. And I don't know if it was a conscious decision, but I knew at that point that was something that I was going to do as much as I possibly could.
You know, Micah, I wish you were the first person to say something similar to that on this podcast. But unfortunately, there's so many people who got into their addiction because the first time they tried alcohol, the first time they tried opioids, the first time they tried meth, marijuana, whatever it was, they had that same calming feeling that came over them. For the first time, they weren't anxious. Yeah,
it's that stress relief. I mean, a lot of times we don't even realize, and especially at age 10, you don't have the self-awareness to realize that you're walking around stressed, or I think maybe in your case, walking around feeling different or weird or unaccepted. And so a substance can initially, you know, give you a biological relief of that. You know, it doesn't change your environment or any of your problems. It just compounds them, but you don't know that, and especially at 10. And I think a lot of listeners might be like, 10, he was smoking weed that early, but that's not that uncommon, especially for a kid who is hanging with older kids, so older siblings or older kids in the neighborhood. a lot of times kids are 9, 10, 11, they're getting introduced. Nowadays, weed is probably the most common thing that kids are getting introduced to.
I mean, I was
at that young
14
age.
when I first started drinking.
Yeah.
So, I mean, wasn't...
Yeah, 14 is really common. Any parent who's listening, if you have a junior high age kid, you need to be talking about drugs and alcohol because that's common.
We say talk to your kids about drugs and alcohol before somebody else does.
Yeah.
And Micah was unfortunately getting talked to by boys that were twice his age.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, it gets a little weirder because I quickly found out that my mom smoked pot, and my mom was an alcoholic. My mom's in recovery today. She celebrates 13 years this year. Shout out to my mom. But when I found out that my mom smoked weed, that conversation ended up happening, that I was smoking weed, and my mom invited me to get high with her because I was running the streets with these older kids, and she would rather me stay home and get high with her if that's what I was going to do. And so at a young age, my mom was the cool mom. I would come home from school and I would do my chores, and my mom would, give me a joint. And, and so it just compounded, some of the
Were your
ideas
sisters
that I had.
using also?
Eventually. Yeah. They eventually all, we all started partying. We were just party kids. My mom, my mom's new husband, my stepdad, was in a rock band, and they would be gone on the weekends for his gigs, and we would have the party house, and all my older friends would bring all their friends over, and we'd have parties at the house, and it was just normal. When I was a kid, it was just normal. That's just I didn't know anything else.
And I think that's so important to talk about, is that to him that's normal. So his, what I mean? How he doesn't know any different.
Well, I mean, that's where we learn what normal is at home, right? I mean, you learn what's normal for almost every type of interaction from your family, from your parents. What do we do at home? That's what we do. So yeah, that would totally shift your mindset as a young person. You're not even a teenager yet, and that just feels like the norm. So, yeah.
After the first time you smoked weed at age 10, how quickly did it escalate to other substances?
I was drinking alcohol, I would imagine, within that same year, within a few months of smoking weed. And, these guys, to no fault of theirs, they thought it was funny to get me drunk, because I was just this little, kid. And, it quickly progressed into LSD and eating mushrooms. I remember being on acid in 7th grade at school.
Wow.
It was just, it was just.
So it escalated to hard drugs fairly quickly.
Yeah. And before I knew it, I was, I had tried methamphetamines, cocaine, heroin. I mean, I had been introduced to all of it as a teenager, for sure.
And how was your high school years? Did you attend? Did you get in trouble?
Well, even junior high. I mean, you're not even in junior high yet, and you're starting to.
Junior high was interesting because I was the kid. My reputation in junior high was I was the kid that always had weed because I stole weed from my parents, from my mom and my stepdad. They had weed, and I would steal it from them, and I was always the kid at school that had weed, and so that was my popularity.
That was your currency.
Yeah, exactly. That was I then found a form of currency, if you will, in school because I was the cool kid that had weed.
What happened to your athletics? You said you were sporty.
My dedication to athletics diminished, but I was, I played Little League football. I would go to practice stoned. Basketball and football were always my things, and I excelled in those sports actively, but I didn't pursue them. I didn't do them for school. I didn't pursue them like I would.
You didn't try out for the school team? Or?
No, I was a stoner. I was just a stoner.
So in a way, that potential got replaced by being a stoner.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Because you're a tall guy. How tall are you?
I'm 6'5".
Yeah, so you're kind of built for those kind of sports.
Yeah.
Play wide receiver or a strong forward on the basketball team, stuff like that.
You got it. That's exactly what I was, and and I was good. It wasn't as important to me because I quickly found out in using at a very young age. I quickly found out that I use differently than other people too. So, my buddies, if they didn't have weed, they didn't smoke weed, right? These guys, if I didn't have weed, I was stealing my mom's pipe and scraping it for resin and smoking it. I was a different kind of user from a very young age. I had to be stoned all the time or things weren't right in my world.
Did you reflect on that at that time, or is that only looking back that you
Looking
realized
back. I mean, it was just kind of normal for me. Looking back, I was like, oh, man, I remember normal, whatever a normal user is, but somebody who just occasionally smoked pot.
At those ages, that's the norm. It's like kids will smoke on the weekend,
Sure.
or if they have
Sure.
it, if they go to a party and there's beer,
Sure.
But they're not waking up thinking, where am I going to get my
fix,
stuff today?
For sure.
I remember sitting at a table and having cocktails with friends, and then we'd get up and go to a movie or a concert, and they'd walk away, and there would be a half beer on the table. I was like, what kind of psycho leaves a half beer on the table? That's not normal.
Well,
you know what I mean? But it is normal.
normal.
But it wasn't normal for me.
That's that
And
addict
so when you say
mindset,
that was I have the same brain set.
Yeah.
So you're hard drugs in 7th grade.
What about grades? I'm curious how this was so social life. You found your calling. You're the stoner kid.
Mm-hmm.
You always are holding, so you're very popular. Mm-hmm. Your motivation to really dedicate yourself to sports dropped off, even though you still liked sports. What about school?
School was the last thing on my mind. I would go to school to meet up with my friend. It was a social event for me. I would go to meet up with my friends, and we would slough. I mean, it was a pretty much everyday event. I did not attend school. I did not take school seriously. School was a place to meet girls and to meet up with my buddies so we could go get high. Yeah. For sure.
So the grades were just Fs?
There was one, I would imagine there was one year where I was lucky to get a D in any class. Mm-hmm. My mom was always showing up. I also fell into the reputation and the role of a fighter. I used to get in a lot of fights when I was a kid, and I think that stemmed from being bullied and then growing up with these older kids and kind of seeing their culture. And as I grew, I realized that maybe, I remember the first fight that I won, and I ran with that because I realized that I was athletic and I knew how to fight. And so then it just progressed into another piece of the reputation puzzle. That's another thing that I adopted to fit in.
And for young boys to feel physically powerful is very important, actually. It's important to feel physically powerful, and there are healthy ways to have that happen, and then there's the unhealthy ways. And somebody who's been bullied has anger and rage inside of them that nobody can understand unless you've been bullied. And so by the time you grew, you I guess you found an outlet for that anger from being bullied.
Sure, yeah, sure. And I don't want to blame anybody, or I don't know how to pass blame on that. I just know that for me, when I ran into that experience of winning that first fight, I never let anybody mess with me again, and even went out of my way to pick fights.
Yeah, and I think on this show and in psychology in general, we have to make a distinction between reasons and excuses, right? And we can't ever understand something if we don't understand the reasons that things happen. And so I think that's kind of where we're going. Sometimes people will say, well, that's an excuse to continue to do it. And that's not what we're after. I think what you're saying is it's regrettable that you were this young kid who his identity was, I'm a fighter and a stoner. I mean, that's not really a badge of honor that you wear anymore.
Yeah, I like that. Reasons and excuses. That was my evolution. And so when I was 15, I believe I was in 9th grade. And this is kind of where this story turns to a little bit different direction.
Well, then let me stop you right there, because what we'll do is we'll come back. We'll hear more of Micah Niles' story. You're listening to Project Recovery right here. It's a KSL podcast. Hey, welcome back to Project Recovery. Now, Micah, you said this is when the story takes a different turn. Up to this point, it's been pretty crazy so far. I mean, for lack of better terms, you did acid in 7th grade in junior high. You started hanging out with high school kids when you were 10. You're smoking pot with your mom, but this is when it gets a little crazy, you said.
Yeah. So this is where, being a pothead, being a stoner, knowing that I had a different kind of itch for life than most people. There was a day where I didn't have any drugs, and I wasn't, that wasn't okay in my world at the time. A friend of mine And we went and broke into a car. We stole a checkbook, and with my school ID, I cashed a check for $40 at a bank. And I put in the memo line for babysitting because I didn't know what else to put. And a couple months later, a detective showed up at my house and arrested me and took me to detention center for third-degree felony for check fraud. And that is where my criminal career kind of started. I ended up going to DT, like I said, and then from there it was a series of group homes, observation and assessment, Genesis, wilderness programs. I mean, you kind of name it, and I'd been there because every time I was released, I would go right back to my friends. I would go right back to what I knew, and that only enhanced my reputation as a bad boy, you know. And I adopted that and rode with that, you know, because it just some way, somehow, it just gave me that feeling of fulfillment and acceptance. So, you know, fast forward through high school. High school was a series of lockup facilities. You know, I'd be out for a little bit. I went to Granite High School, and, you know, it's just, again, I didn't take it seriously. I was either on the run from youth corrections. There was a time where I slept in one of my friend's Jeeps, in the back of his Jeep every day at school because I couldn't go to school because the officers were looking for me. And you know, I mean, it was just, you know, I was just that kid. And, you know, when I turned 18, I was released from youth corrections. And before my graduating class actually graduated, so they would have graduated in May of 2001, and in April, a friend of mine decided, a buddy of mine, him and I decided we were going to steal a car, and we were going to go and start a new life in Las Vegas. And so I stole my girlfriend's car. We were on our way to Vegas, and we got pulled over in St. George. And we got in a high-speed chase. We wrecked the vehicle. We jumped out. We tried to run. We got arrested, went to jail. And because of my juvenile record, I was sentenced to go to the Utah State Prison and do a program called Diagnostics. And back then it was a program where, you know, you go, they do a series of evaluations to figure out if you need to be in prison or if there's a program or something else that might be better suited for you. And I wasn't there very long before I ran into somebody in the prison that, you know, him and I had a, you know, quote unquote street beef. You know, we didn't like each other from the outside. And we got in a fight. I was immediately sent back down to my judge, and my judge sentenced me to prison. So, you know, here I am, this young kid who had ran through the juvenile system, you know, full-on drug addict, and now I'm in prison. And from there, it was, you know, released from prison, go back on a violation. I was released from prison again. I stole another car, got in another high-speed chase, wrecked another vehicle, was sentenced back to prison, got out after a few years, and I was on the run from parole again because I was doing drugs. I mean, it was just the same cycle. At that time, I was arrested for a possession of a firearm by a convicted felon, and I was sentenced to federal prison. And I got out of federal prison March 22nd of 2010, and I you know, I wish I could say that was kind of the end of the roller coaster, but it just wasn't.
I mean, that's a lot.
Yeah. I'm exhausted listening to that. That's a lot.
We're exhausted listening to it. How exhausting was it living that life?
I once again, I adapted. You know, I was a chameleon. I was good at fitting in.
But you know, I don't know if the listeners, I think they probably are. They've picked up on this, and we've chatted a little bit off the air today. You strike me as sort of an insightful, reflective person at this point in your life. Yeah. Right? You have good insights. Yeah, I mean, you had some really neat ideas that we've talked about off the air. And what was going on? Like, was it just the drugs, or was there something about being young? Like why weren't you learning? Like 2 high-speed chases, one's maybe more than enough. You did 2. Like the first one didn't work out.
Yeah. Multiple stints in prison. Like,
was there what was your thought process? Was it like, I'm going to be a better criminal this time? Or was there ever a moment of contrition where you thought, man, I shouldn't be doing this?
It sounds like there wasn't much thinking at all.
No, there wasn't. Well, you know, every time I was in prison, my intention on getting out of prison, my intention was to do good. My intention was to get out, not go back to that life. I had every intention on getting a job and building my life because I go back to that 8-year-old little boy, and I remember being a Ninja Turtle, and at my core, I was not that person. At my core, I was, this soft, emotional, kid. And
so when you were pulled out of your life of, wild life, and you were sitting in prison, you really did think, man, I want to be different. I want to be like that Ninja Turtle again.
Well, and I wanted to be successful. I always knew, and success at the time was monetary. That's what equated success to me. But also, I wanted to have a family. I always wanted to have kids. I just wanted to be normal. But the reality of it was every time I would get out of prison, the only thing I knew was my life. The only thing I knew, and and it goes back to in prison, it's like you're a big fish in a small pond, and you get out, and you're a small fish in a big pond, and just the idea of taking the baby steps that it would take to get where I wanted to be in life and be successful was daunting. It was a daunting task, and it was so much easier to just give myself permission to drink that first time or smoke weed that first time, and that always spiraled into using drugs. And I was an IV meth user. That was the ultimate escape for me. If I can get, I don't know.
No, you can say whatever you want.
I shot up meth for the first time when I was 22 years old when I first shot it, but I had been smoking it and snorting it for many years before that. So when I shot it up for the first time, it was just that ultimate escape. Reality didn't matter because it was just this new world of freedom. And I don't know how else to explain it other than I had no responsibilities. I answered to nobody, and I could do whatever I wanted. And not only was it the ultimate freedom, but it was the ultimate excuse for me to not be where I wanted to be too. 'Cause I was just a loser from prison that was a drug addict, and so.
So the behavior fed the mantra, right?
Sure.
So you're like, and there's so much power in our self-talk, in how we think about ourselves and how we talk to ourselves about ourselves, because we have a hard time engaging in behavior that violates our self-concept. And so if your self-concept is positive at the core, you have a hard time doing self-destructive things. You're mostly going to choose healthy behaviors. If your self-concept is negative, then it's really hard to violate that self-concept by doing positive behaviors. You're going to definitely feel that pull back to self-destruction. And it sounds like that was what was going on for you time and time again.
Sure.
Now, I want to also ask, you're a young guy. You're 18 years old when you first come out of your first stint and all that. Were there not programs to try to help you outside? Because that's the recidivism problem, is a person goes into a state hospital, for example, or they go into prison, for example, and they have that structure there and they have all that help, 24-hour support. A lot of people get encouraged and feeling good, and then they come right back to the environment that helped create the problems in the first place. Were there no transitional programs for you?
No. No, and again, this is one of those reasons, not excuses things. I can't blame the justice system, but I will say that I was required to take classes that were very hard to take seriously because they didn't really relate to most of us, and we were just expected to get out, get a job within the first 30 days, continue to report, and not use drugs and alcohol.
Now, I don't want to throw anyone under the bus because I too have taken those classes. When you get a DUI, you have to. And I'm going to tell you right now, the most important part of those classes
is getting your name written
signature.
No, is that you pay for them.
Oh, that you pay for them.
I mean, sure. Truth be told, that's what it is.
Yeah.
You pay for them, and then you go in there and you can sit there.
Well, I think they're based on old-fashioned, outmoded ideas that, like you said, if you have a job and you don't use, life's going to be good. And maybe it isn't the state's responsibility for us, but I kind of feel like in some ways it is, because they're the ones putting you in that position. I think there are nowadays better programs.
There's drug courts and other stuff like that
we've talked about on the show.
Yeah.
I know it's, and we are talking about a reason. I get the fact that it's not an excuse. We can't say that it's their fault that you came back out and
100%.
used. But man, we can do better as a society by helping people who come out on that sort of positive high. You're trying to change that self-concept. You're feeling like, I want to do it. Like you said, I want to be a good person. I want to be a productive person. I want to be, it sounded like a traditional person with a wife and a family and a job. But that's so hard for so many people to, like when you just hit the streets and you have no support, it's not like you had a family that was modeling that behavior to you.
But
right?
the prison isn't the only place that we're having that same problem. We're having that same problem in the recovery centers all across the state,
sure.
where people come out and they're in this pink cloud. Because when you're in a recovery center, for most part, everything's hunky-dory. You're doing what you're supposed to. You're working out. You're getting fed. And you're like Micah. You're thinking, when I get out, this is going to be good. And then you go back to the same situation that put you in it.
Mm-hmm. And I think the best recovery centers account for that, or at least they try to.
They try to plan an aftercare.
They have aftercare plans and programs. You have to work them.
Sober houses and whatever it is.
Things,
and so I think they are doing it better. But I want to get back to Micah and his story. You're fresh out of federal prison.
Yep, fresh out of federal prison. I found the way that I got off of parole from being out of federal prison was there was a thing years ago, and I don't know if it's still around, but they came out with a thing called Spice. And Spice was this synthetic marijuana, I guess. And I remember being in the halfway house, and we would smoke Spice every day because you didn't test positive. And I was stoned, I still got my fix. I could still, do my thing. And I became an alcoholic and a Spice junkie, for the next 3 years while I got off of parole. And then the worst thing that could have happened for me was I got off of parole because I had no leash. I had there was nothing holding me back.
No accountability.
From my ultimate escape that ultimately the addict, the chaos between my ears, wanted to kill me. And, I eventually went back to a needle. I eventually went back to methamphetamines. And I lived a really slimy life for the next couple of years. It was just hotel rooms, in and out of, living on the streets. I lived in Vegas for a little while. I even moved out to Maryland to try and escape everything, to live with my brother out there. And I became a raging alcoholic there and went right back to Las Vegas. It was just, I could not escape myself. And so, I was taught a long time ago, it's like what happened, what it was like, and what it's like now. So, I'd like to, move into some happier times because for me, I got to a place in my addiction where I was the person that nobody wanted around. I was running around with a crowd of people, and I would get so weird and just hallucinations and craziness, and everybody was following me and all this weird stuff. And the people that I was with didn't want me around anymore. They didn't want, I was asked to leave this environment of scumbags.
When the scumbags don't want you around, that should be a red flag, huh?
Something hit me that day, and for the first time in my life, I became suicidal. And my solution to not being able to figure out life on my own, my solution was I was going to kill myself. I didn't see any reason on continuing this road. And magically, I in my quest to go and find a cliff to drive this rental car off of, I ended up in an ex-girlfriend's neighborhood, and she's also a pivotal part of the story because her and I met years before Dragon State Street. We reconnected, and I ended up in her neighborhood somehow, some way. I really think that it was just a higher power thing. I ended up in her neighborhood. I parked the car, unloaded all my luggage onto her porch, knocked on the door. She told me to leave. She didn't want me there. What are you doing? Get out of here. And I told her to call the police on me and charge me with trespassing because I didn't want to leave because something bad was going to happen. And I woke up. I fell asleep on my luggage on her porch. And I woke up the next morning inside to her telling me to pack a bag and that I was going to treatment. I was going to rehab. And it was all about it. What's the worst that can happen, And I entered treatment that day. And for the first time in my entire life, I experienced I experienced a team of professionals that loved me and that cared about me and that wanted nothing but the best for me. And it was the first time in a long, long time that I found a way to be vulnerable enough to unload Micah onto the table and ask for help. Ask for help. And I had a therapist, and this is a big piece of it. I had a therapist. Bless his heart, I love him very much. Still in contact with him this day. He said, Micah, your best efforts at life, because I was very frustrated. I was in a lot of shame for who I'd become and where I was at in life. And he said, your best efforts at this have gotten you exactly where you are today. And if that's not okay with you, maybe it's time that you invite some people in your life that can help you. And that made sense to me. And another piece is he said, I want you to visualize the person that you are. I don't want you to have any judgment for him. I just want you to see the man that you've become. Just see him, visualize him, close your eyes. He goes, and now I want you to keep your eyes closed, and I want you to visualize the man that you want to be. Characteristics, job, relationships. I want you to visualize the man that you want to be. He goes, now let's start to transition you from that person to this person. And for me, that made sense, because when I saw the man I was today, and I'm covered in prison tattoos from head to toe, I really adopted that armor and that persona. And when I saw the person I wanted to be, I was obviously in an Armani suit with a briefcase, and whatever that look,
Yeah.
And I saw, but more importantly, I was honest. I was drug and alcohol free, and I was just living life. I was breathing easy, and I didn't have the same demons. And slowly but surely, over the last few years, I have been able to recreate myself and just put down that old tough guy, that old drug addict, that old person that I had turned into. That man that I had turned into. I saw it for what it was, and I was able to slowly but surely, with a lot of mistakes, I was able to create enough awareness about who I had become to start seeing my character defects and to start understanding where they came from and just letting them go.
This might be semantics, but I don't think you recreated yourself. I think you found your true yourself.
Sure.
And I think that's what drugs and alcohol does. I mean, it takes us away from who we really are. And the addict mind is so powerful that it'll make you do things that you never thought you would do. It makes sense out of the insane. And it really is crazy. So because of this recovery center and this wonderful girl who let you sleep on her porch and drive you up to recovery the next day, you found sobriety for the first time at what age?
First time, I was 32 years old. And the lights turned on. For me, it wasn't so much. For me, it was just really good therapy. A lot of my treatment was not really revolved around relapse prevention and the substance abuse. They did a really good job of kind of putting that aside for a minute and hyper focusing on what my core issues were, what it was that caused me to fall into this lifestyle and to fall in this survival mode that I was in for so many years. And that's really what it was. I was just in survival mode.
I think the general public has a kind of a problem understanding that. And we've had so many people on the podcast talk about this, that they go, well, meth is your problem or alcohol is your problem.
Right.
And you go to them and you go, well, yeah, I can see why you think that, but my problems are my problems. Mm-hmm. And alcohol and meth are my solution to my problems. And now that starts to become one big jumbled mess towards the end. But initially, for most people,
I think that's part of understanding. I mean, we can't really fix something if we can't accurately diagnose and understand it, right?
It goes back to reason and excuse.
Exactly. And so if we can understand the underlying reasons why a person has become an addict, what are the core, like you said, core issues? And I bet there were several, given the story you've just told us.
Sure.
You probably didn't understand those until you were in. And I like how you said, how you talk about the therapist there, because that goes back to what we say on the show a lot, that the opposite of addiction is
connection.
And they connected with you, and they cared about you, but they were tough with you.
Sure.
But that connection made you, I think, want to engage in the therapy. And by understanding those core issues, then you can get past the manifest issues. The issues that everyone sees are the drugs that you use and the behaviors that come from the drug use. But the underlying core issues, that's the 8-year-old boy still inside who hasn't ever really found a healthy identity.
Yeah. Yeah.
So at 32, you're sober, and you're becoming the man in the Armani suit. How does life go from there?
Yeah, so I wish I could tell you guys that was my last time using drugs and alcohol. And this is a very important part of the story for me, because I think that a lot of people that have experienced addiction and alcoholism can relate to this. When I got out of treatment, I didn't take an aftercare plan seriously, and I thought I was healed. I really truly thought that I was never going to use again. It was
thanks, guys, appreciate it.
Exactly. It was like I was out of prison, and you see this pink cloud, and life is different, and I was better physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually than I'd ever been in my whole life. And just thought that I was going to ride that out until till forever. And so I stayed sober for a couple of years, without working a program and without being involved in something. I was around people in recovery. I worked in recovery, and so again, it goes back to the conversation we had offline. Is I thought that I thought my recovery was going to come to me through osmosis from everybody else working their program, and just being around them was going to save me. But ultimately, what ended up happening was I had a conversation with somebody who brought up the fact that they had some weed. It was my a guy that did some work for me at my house, and he doesn't know my story. He doesn't know my history, and I obsessed over the fact that I could go get high for a couple of weeks until the day that I called him and decided that I was going to go smoke pot. And I had a number of other things that were going on in my life. Stressors, just things that were happening at the time. One important thing about recovery is life still continues to happen. Not doing drugs and alcohol does not mean that life gets easier. It just means that you have more tools and you have a better way of interacting with those stressors. So I went and smoked pot and, hid it from my wife, was lying and sneaking away and just being old behaviors, just very deep old behaviors. My wife found out. She asked me to leave. She wasn't going to do it with me anymore.
Understandable.
Bless her heart. I love you, babe. And I left. And once again, my mind, the chaos between my ears decides that I'm going to go get meth. And I went and got a bag of meth, and I went to Wendover, and I stayed in a hotel room for 4 days and gambled a bunch of money. And I had an 8-month-old son at home. I had a wife, bills, but none of that mattered. None of it mattered because my frontal lobe was completely hijacked, by my addiction once again. And I was coming back from Wendover. I found myself in my mom's neighborhood, went to my mom's house, had nowhere else to go. And my mom, obviously understanding where I've been, she's in recovery. She looked at me dead in the eyes and she said, "Micah, you need help, right? Like, you need help." And I immediately sobered up. I had a moment of clarity, and I reached out to the treatment center that I went to. I reached out to the owner, a man that I love very much, and told him that I was out of control and I needed to come back. And he said, "We've got a room for you. Come back tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. And I did. And while I was in treatment that second time, more shame than I'd ever experienced in my whole life.
Because you got it all back.
I had built a life. I had a good job. I had my name on a house. I mean, I was doing things that just people where I had come from and with my background, just not very many people are able to accomplish that. And I was right back. You
had started to become that positive figure that you visualized.
Yeah. And so, back in treatment, got on my knees for the first time in a long time. Didn't really know what I was doing. I remember just sobbing. What do I do? How am I back here, and what do I do? What is it going to take this time? And the answer that I got was, for me, I needed to go to meetings. I needed to find a sponsor. I needed to work the steps, and that was literally the voice that was in my head. And I was not happy about that, if I'm being honest. Because I was the guy.
You got any other options up there? Because this one's not sounding good.
I was the guy that I had been to meetings. I tried that out, and quote unquote, it didn't work for me. And I don't know how deep we want to get into it. Alcoholics Anonymous is a program of attraction rather than promotion. But sharing my story, I think it's important for people to understand that going to meetings, in my experience, was not the solution for me. Getting a sponsor, working the steps, working with other alcoholics, and staying in the middle of that program is what has worked for me.
And as of today, how much sobriety do you have under your belt?
I just celebrated 3 years of continuous sobriety from all mind-altering substances, April 25th, 2018.
Congratulations.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's absolutely amazing.
Yeah. And you've done it through action, and I think that's the thing to stress is that a lot of support and help can be offered to a person. But I think what you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, is nobody can make it happen for you. There's a buffet of options out there to get sober, but it's the action that the person takes, him or herself, that makes the difference. And once you decided to really take that action and make it part of your life, that's what's kept you sober. Would you agree?
Absolutely. It takes a lot of willingness to set aside beliefs and ideas and all of that other stuff, because along the way I had, as I talked about earlier, I had adopted a way of interacting with myself in the world that just didn't work. It just didn't make sense, and it didn't work. And so, it takes a lot of willingness to set that aside and try something new. And for me, there was a lot of ego and a lot of pride that, tried to take over. And so it was just a matter of willingness to do whatever it takes. And today, I get to be part of the No Matter What Club, because for sure today I will not pick up. I will go to bed sober tonight, and that's all that matters for me.
I like that. I've never heard that, and I thought we've heard most of everything, but the No Matter What Club.
No matter what, and no matter what, I won't pick up. No. And if I do that, and as you talked about earlier, recovery being number one, absolutely, without question. If I don't have my recovery, I don't have anything. I don't have my marriage. I'm not a dad anymore. I don't have my job. I don't have anything. But if I put recovery number one, I get to be a good dad. I get to be a good husband. I get to be a good employee. And I get to help other people, which is just, for a guy like me, is just magic.
We should talk about what you're doing now, because he's actually working for Ty Hansen, who was one of our first guests.
Yeah, one of our very first.
Yeah, at Steps Recovery Centers. And so you're working over there now. Mm-hmm. And, I was talking to you when we were booking this to have you come in here that the recovery centers are getting ready for a big influx of people, because this coronavirus has just created a perfect storm for mental health and substance abuse.
Yeah, it's been tough. It's been really tough because, even the people that had lifelines, that had a program of recovery, the rug was taken right out of underneath them when COVID happened. The connection you get from, and I'll use meetings. The connection you get from going to a meeting is unparalleled to most things. And, not being able to do that and being isolated in your home, I mean, it's caused people a lot of mental health, falling into addiction for the first time or falling back into addiction for, to self-medicate. It's been tough.
You guys have a detox facility out in Payson. Mm-hmm. And I want to talk a little bit about the detox facility, because I got a lot of people who call me and reach out on Facebook and want to know where to start. Mm-hmm. And I always say the detox facility is usually the best place to start, because it's 5 to 10 days, and then that'll give us an idea of being able to find you a bed, figure out where you need to go. Yeah. And you do not want to detox yourself. I know people who've done it. Nobody recommends it.
No.
But alcohol is one of the most dangerous substances to detox from, and opioids and heroin. And this way you're doing it in the confinement of under supervision of professionals.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, detox is designed, obviously, for medical stabilization, to make sure that an individual is healthy and stable throughout the withdrawal process. Alcohol and benzodiazepines can be very dangerous to detox from. And so, it's really important for those two things specifically to have medical supervision. Our detox is they're getting their vitals taken every couple of hours. We're making sure that they are healthy and okay during that withdrawal process, because it can be fairly scary.
Now, Dr. Matt, I don't know if you know this, maybe you do. I'm sure Micah does, because when I worked in the recovery world for a while, right out of recovery, and I was on the front lines of people calling and wanting help. There's the short window of when somebody says they need help. If you can't get them in there, the brain will trick you into thinking, well, maybe we don't need it, or we can go there. So these are something that you should know about. If you've got a loved one who's battling addiction, know where the detox facilities are around, because you get that moment of clarity, like you've said a couple of times in your recovery, where you went, yes, I do. Mm-hmm. And you don't know how long that clarity is going to last.
Right. It's sometimes only minutes.
Yeah.
But yeah, knowing detox is probably the smart place to start.
We should do a whole episode on detoxing.
Yeah, I think we could have some people come in who run detox centers and talk about it. What's your experience been with it, Micah?
So, my detox has always been from methamphetamines. I've never had a lasting addiction with anything that caused me to need to detox from.
For those who don't know, because we'd have people who would call me and they were, their DOC drug of choice was Adderall or meth. Mm-hmm. There's really no detox from that. You just stop using it. It's if I understand this correctly.
There are times where we'll bring somebody in that's detoxing from methamphetamines, and the reason why is because the aftercare plan is for them to admit to residential treatment, and we've got to make sure that they are running on their own energy sources before they enter the therapeutic community of residential treatment.
So that's more of a glorified babysitter to make sure that you're here, that when we take you into the house, that you don't mess with the milieu and you're not completely whacked out.
There's that, and it's also the health care piece of it, right?
Is essential.
Like Mike is saying, we really want a person to have adequate health care, have your vitals taken, make sure that you are hydrated and nourished and comfortable. A lot of times when people try to detox on their own, they can trigger seizures, which can create a whole slew of other problems. And some people have passed away and died during their self-administered detoxes. So the University of Utah at the Huntsman Mental Health Institute
is a great one.
Is a great place.
I went there.
That's where you went. Steps has the place down if you're maybe in central Utah and you want to go to some place closer to home, like Payson. That's a great place. And there are a few others, of course, around. But wherever you live, if you yourself or if a loved one is struggling with addiction, a great place to start is look up where the medical detox
associate yourself around you. Yeah. What would you say you learned most on this episode of Project Recovery, Dr. Matt?
Well, Mike has touched on one of my interests in psychology, and that's identity development. It's a very psychological term, and it so highly influences everything we do in life, how you think about yourself, who you believe you are, and how that process starts at such a young age. And so taking care of yourself, taking care of the people around you, and keeping in mind that these young people are developing their sense of self, and that determines the decisions that they're going to make. And so, to me, my heart goes out to the young person that you were, to have to be a tough guy, to have to be a stoner, to have that be your identity. What a burden and what an obstacle that was. But I'm so pleased to see you sitting here with good insight and positive energy. And obviously you've overcome and developed a new identity. But I guess that's my takeaway, is that identity, man, that's tough. That's who you are.
And as for me, I kept going back to when he was young and talking about his normal. Now, Micah's normal was normal to him because that's all he knew.
Yeah.
To me, it seems anything but normal. And so
right.
we've got to have a better understanding.
Okay, so you just opened the door for a question I wasn't going to ask, but I think I'll ask it.
Yeah.
Okay. So because we're kind of going back in your story now, and Casey's bringing up what was normal to you, and that had to do with like your mom and family and everybody sort of using together.
Yeah.
And you used sort of, I know it was, in air quotes, the cool mom. She became the cool mom. And I don't want you to feel it's Mother's Day coming up.
Yeah.
You love your mom. I don't want you to feel like I'm asking you to say anything negative about your mom. But what advice would you give? Because that's a dilemma that some parents who are listening to this show are going through right now. Should I be the cool parent? Should I let the kids come drink here because at least I know where they are? Let them come party here because at least I know where they are and I can sort of keep them safe. What would you tell a parent who's considering becoming the cool parent and letting the teenagers use at their house?
I think what I would say to those parents is, really just be the change, be the change that you want to see. Don't normalize something that could negatively impact the rest of their life. Don't, I love my mom, bless her heart. We've had many, many conversations. We're obviously both in recovery and we have a much different relationship today than we ever did. But, I think that it's important for parents to understand that kids are so malleable that, one decision that you make can impact, positive or negative, the rest of their life.
I love that. Don't normalize something that could be a dangerous thing in their life.
Keep the boundary.
Yeah.
Hold the boundary of, this is what I'm willing to do, even if it's do as I say, not as I do type thing. And I hate to say that, but that's the reality of it, in my opinion.
Yeah, great. I like that.
If people want to find more about Steps Recovery, where do they go?
You can go to stepsrecovery.com. If you need help, you can call 801-465-5111. That's, one of our admissions lines. You can also reach out to me on social media, but, you can find us. Steps Recovery is one of the largest treatment organizations in the state of Utah. We're all over the place.
Awesome. Hey, thank you for stopping by and sharing your story, and I guarantee it's going to help somebody out there.
Definitely. Great.
Thank you guys very much.
That's what this podcast is all about, and don't forget, it's brought to you by our friends at knowyourscript.org. And once again, Project Recovery is a KSL podcast.
The contents of this program are for informational purposes only. The program is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician, licensed therapist, or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you've heard on this program. KSL does not recommend or endorse any specific tests, physicians, products, procedures, opinions, or other information that may be mentioned on the program. Reliance on any information provided on the program is solely at your own risk.
2 years ago, Americans watched in horror as a crisis unfolded at the Kabul airport.
She was tear-gassed and beaten.
Images of thousands desperate to escape Taliban oppression filled our news feeds. More than 80,000 Afghans made it to America, but the story didn't end there.
It was very cold. There was no power, no heat.
Who would help our newest neighbors? I'm Andrea Smartin. In Stranger Becomes Neighbor, you'll hear the stories of some remarkable refugees who left their homes and their dreams behind, only to start over from zero.
Their only possession was 3 blankets.
And you'll meet Americans who stepped up to help them.
You want me to come when you deliver your baby.
What can one person do in the face of an international disaster decades in the making? That's Stranger Becomes Neighbor. Find us at kslpodcast.com, follow us on Apple Podcasts, or anywhere else you listen.